Ready to dive into some fascinating stuff. We're really digging into academic writing this time, pulling apart all these excerpts from Writing for Publication, Georgina Tawari Stewart, and Nessa Devine. They put it all together.
Oh, it's going to be a wild ride, you know. People hear academic writing and they think it's all like one big rule book.
Yeah.
Not even close.
Right. I was surprised too. My notes are a mess because I was so stuck on like just journal articles. But we've got chapters, encyclopedia things, even opinion pieces, all different approaches.
Totally. Each one, it's like, okay, imagine trying to join a whole bunch of different clubs, all academic, right? Got to learn how they talk in each one. Like newspaper articles, that's a good example. The source mentions this formula, almost, but you hit the reader with a conclusion right away. Bam.
Makes sense. Got to grab them while they're scrolling, right?
Yeah.
So different from that slow build-in, like a traditional paper.
Totally. And this is where things get tricky, because picking the right place to publish, that becomes huge. You're basically saying, okay, this group of academics, this is who I want to talk to.
Speaking of reaching people, can we talk open access? In my notes there are, well, let's just say I have a lot of questions. Seems like strong feelings on all sides.
Yeah, it's tough. See, the whole point T of open access is amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Knowledge for everyone, no paywalls, everyone can read your work.
Yeah.
But the problem is someone's got to pay for that publishing, and it's often the researcher.
So someone at like a big fancy university, they might not even blink at a fee that would totally stop someone else from even trying to publish.
Exactly. Not to mention those predatory publishers.
Yeah.
Sounds official, right? But really, they just want to take your money and run. You publish, they vanish, research is gone. It's awful.
Yikes, scary. So authors really need to like be detectives almost. How do you even avoid those bad journals?
Well, first off, if they're all guaranteed publication, run. Big red flag. Same if they promise super fast turnaround. Real journals, they take their time. Transparency is key. Why? Who's on their editorial board? What's the peer review process really look like? And those fees, they should be upfront about all that.
Yeah. It's a minefield out there. Choosing where to publish, it's like its own skill almost.
Yeah.
As important as the actual writing.
No kidding. And this is going to sound weird, but one of the coolest things this book talks about is how being yourself in your writing, like your real perspective, that actually makes your work stronger.
So no more pretending to be like this perfectly objective robot, thank goodness.
Forget the robot. Nesta Devine, one of the editors, she calls it standpoint positioning. Basically, who you are, your background, it influences how you approach a topic. A scientist, they're coming at it from data, experiments, historian. They're all about archives, interpretation.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah. So when that Tongan scholar in the book, right at the start, she talks about her heritage, that's not just like background info. It tells us how she sees the issue.
Exactly. And that whole idea of being open to different ways of seeing things, that goes for research methods too. The book dives into some wild stuff like using poetry, even personal experiences, as totally legit ways to learn.
Wait, hold up. Poetry as research. Okay, now I have to know more. How does that even work?
There's this chapter by Adrian Schoon, and it's fascinating. He calls it found poetry. And he was doing research on alternative schools. He'd interview these teachers, and later in the transcripts, he'd find poems within what they said, like hidden in their words. He argues those poems, they tell a deeper truth you might miss otherwise.
Whoa. So you're using like a whole different part of your brain to understand something, makes you wonder what else you were missing by sticking to the same old methods.
Right. And that leads to a huge question this book keeps bringing up. If we're going to challenge those old ways of doing things, what does that mean for the author? Like, what is their role, really?
Yeah, because suddenly it's not just about being right or wrong. It's about the person behind the research. Their story matters.
Exactly. And that whole objectivity versus subjectivity thing, man, that's a rabbit hole this book dives right into, especially when it comes to how much of the author's voice should come through to, oh, it's a dance for sure. Sometimes more like wrestling a bear. You know, you've got all these different styles, different ways people do research, and trying to get them all to sound like one voice. It's tough.
Yeah.
Lots of communication, that's key. And got to be willing to bend a little, meet in the middle.
Sounds familiar. Like any good relationship, right? Got to talk it out, try to see where the other person's coming from. But when it works, when you get that blend, man, that's got to be where the magic happens.
Absolutely. The book even says sometimes having someone else see on your work, it makes you see it totally fresh. They're challenging you, but in a good way, pushing you further than you'd go alone.
100%. Fresh eyes, they can change everything. Like having a sounding board, but for your research, you know? Bouncing ideas off each other, things get sharper.
Exactly. And this whole thing about different voices, different experiences, that ties right into this chapter by Ingrid Boberg. She's all about using your body in research, like not just your brain, your whole self. Emotions, senses, even what you feel physically. It's wild.
Hold on, we're talking like incorporating what it feels like to do the research into the research itself. Okay, gotta admit, this is new territory for me. What does that even look like in practice?
So Boberg, she says the way we usually do research, it creates this distance, right, between the researcher and what they're studying. But embodied learning, that's about diving in.
So instead of being a scientist observing a bug under a microscope, you are the bug.
Kind of. More like you're trying to understand the bug's world by using all your senses, not just your eyes. She uses the example of art critique. Instead of just, analyzing a painting intellectually, students are encouraged to share their gut reactions. How does it make you feel? That sort of thing.
It's like that saying, walk a mile in their shoes, right? Except now you're walking a mile in your research subject's shoes. Never thought about it like that.
Exactly. And Boberg, she's saying this works for all kinds of topics, especially those big, messy social issues. The more we understand our own experiences, our own bodies, the more empathy we bring to the table,
It's amazing how this stuff, like the embodied research and the poetry thing we talked about, it really makes you question what's considered acceptable in academia, like who gets to decide that?
Right. It's about breaking those old rules, finding new ways to understand things. And you know what that brings us back to? The author. Their role in all this seems like it keeps popping up in your notes.
It's true. The more we dig into this book, the more I'm fascinated by this question of WHO the author is. Like, we're peeling back layers of an onion, but it's academic writing, and each layer is more interesting.
It's not just about spitting out facts anymore, is it? It's about the whole person behind the research, their biases, their influences, all of it.
And this book, it really pushes back against that old idea of the lone genius, right? Like, brilliance just appears out of thin air.
Oh, absolutely. Nesta Devine, she has this whole chapter on Foucault's idea of self-writing. It's like every time you write, you're figuring yourself out a little bit more, having a conversation with all the stuff you've lived, the good and the bad.
That's kind of awesome when you think about it. So instead of pretending we're these perfectly objective machines, we should be leaning into the fact that we're not.
In a way, yeah. It's like we all have these influences, right? Things that shape how we see the world. And by admitting that, by being upfront about it, that's when people really start to listen. Because you're being real.
Because it shows you understand the context, right? Like you're not pretending your research exists in a vacuum. Other people have been here before, said things, and your work, it's part of that bigger conversation.
100%. Nobody's an island, especially not in academia. We're all building on what came before, adding our own little brick to the wall of knowledge,
Yeah, it's like we're all contributing to this massive evolving story of like what we know and how we know it.
Totally. And that brings us to something else this book really hits on. Storytelling. It's not enough to just have the research, right? You got to make people care. Make them want to keep reading.
Because even the most brilliant research in the world, if it's buried under like a million footnotes and jargon, nobody's going to find it, let alone understand it.
Exactly. The book, it talks about being clear, being concise, and having a structure that pulls the reader along. A narrative, almost like a story.
It's true. There's a huge difference between reading a textbook and like a really good novel. But finding that balance, academic A&D interesting, that's got to be tough.
It takes practice, that's for sure. And being willing to break the mold a little, experiment with how you're writing. There's even this whole section on what they call qualities in the medium, basically how different kinds of language, they can change the whole meaning of your work.
So like if you're researching, say, how climate change affects people emotionally, you might actually use personal stories in your work. Or even poetry, like we talked about before. While someone crunching numbers, they'd stick to the traditional research paper format.
Exactly. Right tool for the job. Always. But, okay, let's say you've written this amazing paper, right? It's clear, it's engaging, it's you on the page. Now you got to get it published. And that means journals.
Ah, yes. The wonderful world of academic journals, where even getting your foot in the door can feel impossible.
And then there's peer review. Shudders. The book, it's honest about how brutal that can be. All the bias, the subjectivity, how much it can hurt to have your work torn apart.
Because even when you know it's supposed to be constructive, having someone critique something you poured your heart into, oof, that's got to sting.
No kidding. But here's the thing. The book, even though it's real about the downsides, it still says peer review is important. It's a chance to learn from the best to make your work even better.
So instead of curling up in a ball when you get criticism, you got to channel that inner Rocky Balboa. Use it to come back stronger.
Exactly. And remember, it's not a one-way street. You get to talk back. Respond to those reviewers, explain yourself, defend your work. It's a dialogue, not a dictatorship.
You're fighting the good fight for your research, for your ideas. But throughout all of this, from that first messy draft to like seeing your name in print, this book, it keeps saying one thing over and over: be kind to yourself.
Oh, that's so important. Because it's easy to get down on yourself, especially in academia where it feels like everyone's judging you all the time.
And that whole imposter syndrome thing, the book actually says even famous academics, they feel that way sometimes. It's kind of comforting in a weird way. Like we're all just figuring it out as we go.
Yeah.
Any tips for when that self-doubt creeps in?
Honestly, just admit you're feeling it. Don't try to fight it alone. Talk to someone, another student, a professor you trust. Just getting it out there. It helps more than you think.
Sharing the load right makes it lighter for everyone. And celebrating the wins, no matter how small, that's got to help too.
Huge. Because this whole academic writing thing, it's not like you cross the finish line and you're done. It's a journey, a long and winding one. There'll be bumps, there'll be times you want to quit, but then you have those moments where everything clicks. And it's amazing.
Those breakthroughs, the aha moments, that's what keeps you going.
Absolutely. So to anyone out there listening who's thinking about this path, about academic writing, do it. Embrace the chaos, find your voice, and never be afraid to ask the hard questions.
Because those questions, they might just lead to the next big discovery, and that's what it's all about, right? Pushing the boundaries of what we know and making the world a little bit brighter, one paper at a time.